Welcome to Call That Girl's Office 365 course. I'm Lisa Hendrickson, your hostess, and this is course number 10. This week we have Anthony Howell, who is going to be doing a PowerShell tutorial demo. Welcome, Anthony.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm so excited to get you in here because I really don't know much about PowerShell. I think that a lot of the students that are students or the technicians watching, a lot of them don't need to do PowerShell, but I know I've been noticing a lot more PowerShell tricks and tips out there to fix things with Office 365.
Oh yeah, and if a lot of those tips and tricks you can just copy and paste. So
yeah, right.
PowerShell.
That's right. And I'm like, I'm still nervous about doing that, but I'm seeing more and more of it. I don't know why, so that's why I was like, let's throw a PowerShell course in here too. So Anthony, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself first and your new business, because a lot of what you're doing is super cool. I'm very interested.
Yeah, so I just a quick history. I've been in IT since 2009 when I started out as a help desk technician in the university. And since then, I've moved, got married, got better jobs, and finally decided that I didn't want someone else kind of running my career. So I quit my day job back in April to kind of focus on my business. And I say focus instead of start because I started my business, I think, in 2014, and I was doing just a general IT support business, and that's a lot of work. And I have a lot of other skills that I picked up working in larger corporate environments, specifically PowerShell. And that's the thing that I really like to do. That's the thing that that I'll be demonstrating for you, and that's what I'm transitioning my business to be, a PowerShell consultancy. So
I've never even heard of that before. I think
there's a few of them out there.
Well, you know what? I see there's a lot of people that have specific blogs for it and such.
Mm-hmm.
You're actually going to be like a technician watching. If they're having an issue, could hire you by the hour to help with a...
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I can write scripts. I can even develop custom modules. That's obviously a much bigger project. But I mean, there's a lot of things that I can do.
Right. Well, that's where I'm kind of thinking that our audience here is going to, like, maybe that works for a bigger company and they got an issue and they need help. You're the type of person they can hire by the hour.
Oh, absolutely.
Like a big, $10,000 contracted project. I mean, most of the trainers in my courses are all by the hour, so it's really nice. It's hard to find people like that. That's why you're an expert, right?
Yeah, I can actually charge for my time doing it.
Exactly. Well, so I remember when I first heard about you, I forgot what I was looking for, but somebody told me to connect with you, and then I called you and we had a great conversation about your... Yeah. I was super excited to find somebody else. So if anybody's watching and you want to go into niche businesses, this is, it can happen, and what you're doing is very niche.
And it's I don't typically recommend doing niche stuff, but I really like it. And so that's where I may not have a lot of business now, but I have a lot of experience, a lot of expertise. And I enjoy it. Whether or not I have work, I've got things I can do.
Okay, well, one thing I'm just going to spill a little beans on that you maybe don't want me to share is that you said I actually got an office and you go to the office every day.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can see I've got one window in my office behind me. But no, I work for myself. Doesn't mean I work from home. I can't because I'm still like the traditional, like, this is my Friday shirt, so it's like a pseudo t-shirt, pseudo collared. It's kind of lame.
Casual Friday outfit.
Yeah. But I still get up every morning. I still put on slacks. I still put on a button-up shirt usually. Today's a terrible representation of that. But I come to the office because I work, 10 times at least more effectively at the office, and then I don't have, my wife bothering me. I mean, not that she bothers me, but distracting me or my daughter wanting my attention. So
yeah, I was very impressed to hear that. I was like, that's super cool you did that, because I'm just getting out of my home office too, and it's so easy to get distracted at home. And
oh yeah.
I did it for 4 years, worked from home, and finally I'm doing it too. So anyway, why don't you tell the folks listening what your email address is and your website, so if they want to go check you out.
Oh, sure. Yeah, the best email way to get a hold of me is howell-it.com. So HOWELL-IT.com. My business is Howell IT, so howell-it.com. The website, depending on when you're watching this, is either the old version or the new version. If it talks about PowerShell and automation, it's the new version. If it talks about small business support, it's the old version. But you can also track me down on my blog, which is theposhwolf.com, P-O-S-H, wolf, that's an abbreviation for PowerShell. I'm also on Twitter at Twitter /theposhwolf. So kind of wolf plays on Howell.
I figured out the posh thing because I'm not into PowerShell world, but let me just tell you, I did learn a little tip from Adam from our last course.
Yeah.
PowerShell is blue.
Yes.
I learned that.
That's a good start.
Yeah, we kind of touched on it in course 9 a little bit. So Anthony, why don't you tell us here's what's happening, folks, is that Anthony, because of what he's doing, decided to pre-cook like the cooking shows. Like, okay, so we pre-cooked his course, which because of just the details and such, I was like, yeah, this isn't a screen share thing, So
yeah, it could be, but we'd end up going back and cutting a lot of it out.
Oh, and I hate editing. No,
yeah, agreed.
But I mean, so this one I'm actually excited because if I'm going to watch this and learn it, I want to stop and review it, and it's not like listening and just learning. So why don't you tell us real quick about the ones you made and a little bit more about them maybe.
Oh, sure. So I've got I forget the exact number, 4 or 5 segments. We've got to divide it up that way. So the first, I kind of talk with my hands, and it's hard with the microphone in right here.
I'm always
the first is just a quick introduction to how to launch PowerShell, the integrated scripting environment, which is Microsoft's built-in tool for writing scripts, because I'll be doing all of the demos inside of that.
Yep.
This is just a really quick how to get started in that. And then I'll go over getting connected to all the various Office 365 services with PowerShell. So they each have a different method. Some of them are similar. I mean, obviously, watch a video and you'll see.
I did.
And then I'll go over how to create accounts in Azure AD, both creating an account, setting the password, and then, of course, some of the licensing. And then I'll go over in 2 different segments, some basic tasks inside of Exchange Online, and then some basic tasks inside of Azure AD as well.
Okay. Well, I'm going to watch them all.
Yeah, I've watched them all many times now.
Yes, you have. Well, when you make videos, you tend to watch them over and over.
Yeah, and re-record, and re-record, and re-record.
And I'll be watching them a lot because I get to do the editing. Well, I did make a joke with Adam that I said I really want to. That's why I asked you, please do it from the launch, because a lot of times when you watch videos, people assume that you just know what you're doing already. And I'm really one of those people that if I can see all the steps, I think I can learn it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm glad you did that. So those are watching, it's going to show how it launches and all the stuff to do and all that. And I told them, very kindergarten level for me.
I tried. And honestly, I've been doing it long enough that there may be some of it that I've just taken for granted that people should know and maybe don't. So it's like, reach out, let me know. I'm happy to explain things.
There might be a part 2, which is really, really slowed down for me. I'll see. If I can actually do anything, then we'll know how well it goes, because I'm going to try.
All right.
I am going to try. I put on my list of things to learn. But then I found out through some folks on a Facebook group about some other things, and I was like scared again. I'm like, I don't think I want to learn it now. I'm afraid I'm going to delete everything.
Well, it is possible. That's why you got to be careful.
Yeah.
And, have a demo environment. That's why you can get trials and just test in a trial environment.
I have one. Office 365 courses.com.
Yeah.
I'm going to be using. All right, Anthony. Well, I think we covered that. I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors, AppRiver, for sponsoring all the courses. And if you want to get in touch with them, you can email my rep, Steve Harris, sharris@appriver.com. There's also going to be a link down below here in the notes. And plus, I'll put in Anthony's information as well. Remember, in course number 4, you can check out BitTitan's free their free migration wiz licenses that you can get to test. And there's some scripting in those. Have you ever used that, Anthony?
What was it called again?
Migration wiz.
I have not used that product before.
It's a migration tool for Office, but they sometimes have some scripts in there that you got to run. So I had to do it, but again, copy paste.
Yeah.
They don't
I mean,
that's
one of the nice things about PowerShell, that's how I got started. I don't know, many years ago. It's just copy paste, and oh wait, now I got to change that variable and this name, and got to start somewhere.
Well, yeah. I remember when they said, "Oh, you got to do this," I was like, "Oh my gosh, I really get nervous with stuff I don't understand." But I've had some good stuff in there. We also got some notes down below for our FAQ page for our marketing partners. Be sure to check that out. I'm not going to have an ending video, so this will, when Anthony's is done, it'll be over this week. Course number 11 is going to be OneNote with Laura Leist, and number 12 is going to be, hopefully, Google Apps versus Office 365. The big differences. I know, it should be exciting.
That'll be a good one.
Yeah, I pulled in a G Suite lover, so for that one, so
Nice.
Google fan. I won't say who yet. We'll leave it as a surprise. All right, that's it, folks. Thank you, Anthony, for doing this, and we will see you guys during this course and next course 11. Thanks.
All right, thank you. So before we get started with PowerShell and Office 365, I wanted to spend just a couple minutes going over how to get PowerShell launched, and then a brief introduction to the PowerShell Integrated Scripting Environment, the ISE, because I'll be doing the entirety of my demos inside of the ISE, so I want you to know how that works. So you can see I'm working inside of Windows Server 2016. So this will look similar to Windows 10, and then so for Windows 7 and 8, you guys will have to use the search function if you don't know where PowerShell already is. In this case, on Windows Server, they have it pinned to the Start menu, so we can launch it simply by running it from here. And to run as administrator, if you're not familiar, it's just a simple right-click, Run as Administrator. But if it's not already pinned, there is a Windows PowerShell folder. So what I'll do here is I'll go ahead and right-click it and Run as Administrator. And depending on how you've got your environment configured, it may ask you for username and password. It may prompt the UIC just for yes, no. You can see that I've got that disabled just for convenience. This is not a production system, so it's not important. And in this case, I know it's running as administrator because I get the administrator up in the title bar. And then the PowerShell ISE is in the same Windows PowerShell folder. So I'm going to go ahead and right-click and run this one as administrator as well. And so the PowerShell ISE will look similar to you if you've ever worked in like an IDE or something similar. So we've got our script above, our terminal down below. So I can actually type in a command here. And then if I've got my cursor on that line, or if I highlight that line and select F8 on the keyboard, it runs that command. So that's exactly how I will be doing all of the demos. So if you wanted to follow along, open up the scripts in the ISE, you can do the same thing. You can edit it, you can put in your code, and I'll just show you how to use it. So without further ado, let's jump right into getting connected to Office 365 with PowerShell. So for Office 365 and PowerShell, the first thing I wanted to go over is how to get connected to all the various Office 365 services using PowerShell. So for all the demonstrations, I'll be working inside of PowerShell version 5, and that ships standard with Windows 10 and Server 2016. So if you're using an earlier version of Windows back to 7 and 08R2, you'll need to install the Windows Management Framework 5.1. So I've got the download link for that here. And the reason I'm actually making this a requirement is because to install several of the modules, we'll actually be using the PowerShell Get module that allows us to interact with the PowerShell gallery, and that's only available in PowerShell version 5. So let's talk about the modules that we need to have installed. So the first module I want to go over is Azure AD, and here's where we're using the PowerShell Get module, which I mentioned just a moment ago, to install it. So the install module is the command that we'll use to install the Azure AD module. And so we'll give it the name of that module there and run that command. But in this case, I already have it installed. So I'm going to use the update module commandlet to make sure I have the latest version. And so if you already have it installed, I encourage you to update it using the update module commandlet. And if you've been using PowerShell with Office 365 in the past, you may be familiar with the Microsoft Online Services module. We're not going to be using that module today because the Azure AD module is the next version of that module, and the Microsoft Online Services module will be deprecated at some point. So then for SharePoint Online, that module is available as a download from Microsoft. I got the link for it here. Same thing for Skype for Business Online. I'm not going to walk you through getting those installed because I'm sure you know how to download and install them. So here's the links. Download them, get them installed. And then Microsoft Teams, same thing as for Azure AD. We're going to use the install module commandlet to install it. And if you already have it installed, use the update module to make sure you have the latest version. And then finally for Exchange, we don't need anything besides PowerShell, obviously. That's because we'll create a PowerShell session, and I will show you how to do that. And then quick word about the quick word about the execution policy. For a couple of the modules, the Skype for Business Online Exchange and Security Compliance Center modules, we actually need to set execution policy to allow us to run those scripts. If you're not familiar with the execution policy, that's how PowerShell decides what scripts it will run. By default, it's set to restricted, doesn't allow any scripts. So we just need to set that to remote signed, allowing us to run scripts that were retrieved remotely as long as they are signed. So all these scripts are signed by Microsoft. And if it does ask you to confirm, hit yes. The confirm false flag is supposed to keep that from coming up. But hey, we'll just move on. Okay, so to get connected, we first need to determine the domain host. So this is the domain you initially used to set up your tenant. So it's going to be domain.onmicrosoft.com. So here's mine. I'm going to assign it to the domain host variable for easy access. And then the next thing, if you're going to be connecting to multiple Office 365 services, I encourage you to use a credential variable. So we're going to use get credential to create that. So if I run get credential, it's going to prompt me for my credentials. And I will put them in here. And this allows me to use them multiple times, as I will show you. And if you will be using it multiple times with some of these modules, it's really important to set the password to be read-only. So we use this command here to make the password read-only. That way the modules won't clear out the password once they've used them. So to connect to Azure AD, it's really simple. We use the connect Azure AD commandlet, which is part of the Azure AD module. And then we pass it our credentials. And if you don't specify credentials, it'll just prompt you. So there we go. That is good output. That means that we are connected and we'd be able to run Azure AD module commandlets. And then same thing for Microsoft Teams. Really simple, connect Microsoft Teams, give it our credentials, and then again, if you don't specify them, they'll prompt you. But we've got our nice credential variable, and there we go. We got good output. And then for SharePoint Online, we need to make sure we have that module imported. And then we use the connect SPO service commandlet. So SPO stands for SharePoint Online, and give it the URL of our admin site. So that's where our domain host variable comes into play. And then pass it our credentials as well. And then for this one, no output is good output. And then to connect to the Security and Compliance Center, we create a new PowerShell session using the new PS session commandlet. But we've got all these parameters that we need to set. And what I've got here is a PowerShell splat. So this allows me to specify all of my parameters in an easy to read fashion. So I'm setting the configuration name to be Microsoft.exchange. And then the connection URI, this is the URI that I will be connecting to with PowerShell. And this is going to be the same exact URI that you use. And the way Microsoft determines what Exchange endpoint to connect you to is through your credentials, which we're specifying with the credential variable. And then by setting the allow redirection flag to true. And then of course we set the authentication to basic as well. So I'm going to pass those to the new PS session commandlet. and then set that on the SCC session variable. And you can see with this output that it tells us that we've been redirected. That is good. That is what we want. So then I'm going to import that PS session into our current PowerShell session so that we have access to all of those commandlets. There we go. And of course, it's complaining about some of the commands, but that's something you can ignore. And then to get connected to Exchange Online, we use very similar syntax. The only difference here is that we have a different URI. So it's a different endpoint. And then again, this is using your credentials and the allow redirection flag to redirect you to the proper Exchange endpoint. So I'm going to do the same thing here, create a new PowerShell session using the new PS session commandlet. And you can see I'm also setting this to the Exchange session variable. I'm doing that so we can import it. Same thing like we did with the Security and Compliance Center. And then importing it, here's what I'm going to do with that variable. I'm also using the allow clobber flag. What that means is that if there's commands existing in our current session that are going to be coming in for this with this new session, it's not going to complain about it. The Security and Compliance Center and Exchange Online, they have some commandlets. They share some commandlets, and so that's I'm just doing the allow clobber flag so that it's not going to throw an error. So finally, for Skype for Business Online, we need to make sure we import the module, and then we create the session using the new CS Online Session commandlet, and that creates a PowerShell session. We give it our credentials, of course. And we pass those to the SFBO session variable, and then we import it. I'm not going to do it here because our demo environment doesn't have Skype for Business Online set up. So this isn't going to work for me, but it would work for you if you've got a Skype for Business Online set up in your tenant. So that's how you get connected to all the Office 365 services using PowerShell. And the next thing, for the next segment of the video, I'm going to talk about how to get started creating accounts. To create a user in Office 365 using PowerShell, we use the Azure AD module. That's because Azure AD is the identity provider in Office 365, much like Active Directory is in your on-prem environment. So as a quick refresher, the Connect Azure AD module, the Connect Azure AD commandlet is how you get connected. We're going to skip that since we should already be connected from part 1. But before we create the user, we create the password profile for the user. And to do that, we use the new object commandlet to create a password profile object. So you say new object, give it the type name, which is microsoft.open.azuread.model.password profile. So I'm going to assign that to the password profile variable. And the only property that we need to set, assuming you want the user to log in, is the password property. And so to do that, we give the name of the variable .password, and we say it equals, and then inside of the quotes, we give it a password. So in this case, I've got a pseudo random password that I just banged out on my keyboard. And the other two properties you can set if you want. These do default to true, so you don't necessarily need to, but they are enforced change password policy, enforced change password next login. These default to true, but you can set them to false if you want. And then to create the user, we're going to use the new Azure AD user commandlet. And so I've got splatted here the different parameters that we'll be using. So we're assigning password profile, the password profile variable we created. We're setting the account enabled to be true because we want the account enabled so the user can log in. Defining the user principal name. So this is the name that the user will use to log in. Their display name as well as the mail nickname. This is what shows up in Exchange Online. And then very important to set the usage location. You can't assign a license to a user unless they have their user location set. So I'm in the US, I'm using US. You can look up whatever region you are in as well. What I'm doing is, this is called a splat. So I'm assigning it to the user variable here up top on line 32. And that's because it makes it much more readable. So if I were to use new Azure AD without a splat, this line 42 is what it would look like. You can see that it's really long. We've been doing a lot of left-right scrolling, and that gets old really fast. So I've got it splatted here to the user variable, and then so I pass that to the new Azure AD commandlet using the @ symbol. So if this works, we'll just have created a user. And so it gives us the output of exactly the same as using the get Azure AD user commandlet. So I'm going to run this here and give it the object ID of that user's user principal name, and it's the same output as from before. So the next thing to mention is licenses aren't by default automatically assigned. So to assign a license, we need to see if a license has been assigned. We look at the assigned licenses property. So we can do that by piping get Azure AD user to the select object commandlet and expanding the property by using the -expand property parameter, looking at the assigned licenses. And in this case, there is absolutely no output because this user has no license assigned to it. And I'll walk you through how to assign a license so we get output there. So assigning a license using PowerShell is a little bit more complicated than I like, but this is how you do it. We need to create two objects, first of all, a licenses, so plural, and then a license, singular. And we're creating the type name of, using the new object commandlet, creating the type name of Microsoft.open.azuread.model.assigned licenses, and then .assigned license. So I'll go ahead and run these two lines so we get those objects created. And what we want to do is we want to find the SKU of the license that we want to assign. So we can look at all of them using the get Azure AD subscribed SKU. So here on line 63. And you can see that in this tenant, we've got two subscribed SKUs. So Exchange Standard and No365_Business_Premium. In this case, I want to assign this user just the Exchange Standard SKU. So to find that, I can pipe get Azure AD subscribed SKU to the where object commandlet, telling it where the SKU part number is equal to Exchange Standard. So what this should output is everything in this list that has an SKU part number equal to Exchange Standard. So in this case, there's only one of them, so we should only see one output here. So I can just do a test run here, and yeah, we only do see one output. So then I'm going to assign the .sku property of license to the .sku ID of that Exchange Standard SKU. And so now if we look at the license.sku ID, we can see that we have a GUID here, and that's what we want. And so now we take the licenses, plural, and add the license to the add licenses property using this line here on 66. And so now what we've told that licenses object is that we're going to be adding that Exchange Standard license to it. And so we now use the set Azure AD user license commandlet and give it the user principal name of that user again, and passing it that licenses object to the assigned licenses parameter. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. And then we can run that same exact command before, where we're piping the get Azure AD user to the select object looking at the assigned licenses property. But in this case, we actually do see some outputs. That's the same SKU ID we saw just a moment ago, and that tells us that this user now has that Exchange Standard license. So for the next segment, we'll go over some basic tasks inside of Exchange Online and Azure AD. All right, so let's jump into some simple tasks in Exchange Online using PowerShell. So as a quick refresher, if you're not already connected, here's how you do it. I want to skip doing that at the moment, so we can get right into this. So the first thing I want to go over is managing the access protocols for a mailbox. So we've got the mailbox we created, and we can validate that using the get mailbox commandlet. And then if we want to look at the access protocols for this mailbox, we use the get CAS mailbox commandlet. And in this case, CAS stands for Client Access Server. And then we specify the name of the user. And we can see that all of our access protocols are enabled for this mailbox. And so if we wanted, for example, to disable POP or IMAP, we use the set CAS mailbox commandment, give it the name of the mailbox, and then use the POP enabled parameter and set it to false, as well as the IMAP enabled parameter and set that to false as well. And then we use the get CAS mailbox commandment to validate. There we go. We can see that both POP and IMAP are disabled for this user. And then if you wanted to bulk edit all of your mailboxes and set both POP and IMAP to disabled, you can using the pipeline. So we would simply use get mailbox without any parameters, because without any parameters, it will output all of your mailboxes, and then pipe that using the pipe character. That's what I got there. Pipe it to the set CAS mailbox commandment and specify which you'd like to disable. And I'm not going to run this command right now because it can take a while depending on how many mailboxes you've got. So just as an example, that's how you would do it. So then another task you may find yourself doing is managing what PowerShell considers the auto reply configuration. So the out of office responses for a mailbox. We can look at the existing settings using the get mailbox auto reply configuration commandment, and of course specifying the name of the mailbox. There we go, and we can see that this is not currently enabled. Yep, there we go. The auto reply state is set to disabled. And so if we want to enable this, here's a simple example on just simply enabling the auto reply messages. So we use the set mailbox auto reply configuration. And I've got the settings splatted here. So I've got the name of the mailbox, and I'm setting the auto reply state to enabled. You can also set it to scheduled, and I'll show you that here in a second. But then we can specify the external and internal messages. And they can be different, but for the sake of simplicity, I've just got them set to the same thing. So I'm going to go ahead and run that commandlet and set it for this mailbox. And so now we can look at that mailbox we can look at the auto reply configuration using the get mailbox auto reply configuration commandlet. And so now we can see that we've got a couple of messages. Oh, and it also auto formats them in HTML. And then the auto reply state is now set to enable. So let's take a look at a slightly more complicated example. So we can schedule it by setting the auto reply state to scheduled. But in this case, we'd have to set the start time and the end time as well. So what you're seeing here is the PowerShell string format of a date time. So simply putting the date followed by the time inside of quotes. And I'm also setting the external audience to all. You can set them to known or to none. So if it's to none, it doesn't respond to anybody. That's external. And then I've also got the messages, the internal and external messages set with my own HTML. So you can define this pretty granularly. And if I wanted, I could throw in some italics, some bold, some images. You know, you could really get fancy there. I'm not fancy in this case. It's just a simple example. But we can run that again by using the set mailbox auto reply configuration. And then we can, of course, look at it using the get mailbox auto reply configuration. And here you can see the start time down below, as well as our nice pretty messages and the end time. And then we can see the auto reply state is set to schedule. So we know that it will run between the start time and the end time. So another thing that's pretty useful to know is creating resource mailboxes. So for this example, since it's a fairly simple one, I've got it set up here. So this is what I've been doing with some of these longer commandlets is the splat. And so here's a splat version of the commandlet followed by the normal version of the commandlet. And you can see we're creating a resource mailbox with the name garage and setting the room equal to true. And so we can run that commandlet to create our resource mailbox. You can see that I've actually it already does exist here. And then the really cool thing about resource mailboxes is, of course, the calendar processing of the mailbox. And we can edit all of that using PowerShell. And this is just a really simple example here. So of course I'm telling it what mailbox to edit. We're setting the allow conflicts to false, so no conflicts. Setting allow recording meetings to true. And setting the automate processing to auto accept. So the other options are none or auto update. And this, of course, will only auto accept meetings that meet all of your criteria. So I'm also setting here the booking window in days. So this is how far out someone can create a meeting. So in this case, 1 year. Maximum duration of a meeting in minutes, of course. So this is 10 hours. And then setting the process external meeting messages to false. So if an external person tries to create a meeting in this room, it won't work. So we'll set those using the set calendar processing commandlet. And then we can look at it using the get calendar processing commandlet. And in this case, I'm piping it to the format list. So it will list out all of the settings. Otherwise, it doesn't say much because there are a lot of settings here that we can look at. And we can set all of these using the set calendar processing commandlet. I'm just using a really simple example to get you started. And so the last thing I want to take a look at is managing the mailbox permissions. So we got our mailbox from before, and to look at the existing permissions on the mailbox, we use the get mailbox permission commandlet, and of course specify the name of the mailbox. And there's actually quite a bit of output here, and most of it isn't applicable to us because it's all inherited stuff from the Exchange organization. So I'm going to pipe that output to the where object commandlet and filter out all the inherited permissions. And so what we'll see here is just the single entry for the self identity. So giving the mailbox access to itself. And so if we want to add permissions to this mailbox, we use the add mailbox permission, and of course specifying the mailbox that we'll be managing permissions for, and what user we'll be giving permissions to, and then what level of permission to give. So in this case, I'm setting the access rights equal to full access, pretty standard there. And so we'll run that with the add mailbox permission commandlet. And then we can validate that using the get mailbox permission. And I'm still using the where object commandlet to filter out the inherited permission. And we can see that now the admin account has full access to this mailbox. And then to remove the mailbox permission, we use the remove mailbox permission. And you can see that I'm actually using the same exact parameters. So it's using the splat from before. So it's still saying the same mailbox, the same user, and removing the same permission that we added. So I'll go ahead and run the remove mailbox permission. And then of course, since we're removing something, it actually has the access to confirm it. So I'm gonna say yes. And if we wanted to avoid having an access to confirm, we would use the confirm parameter and set that to false. And so now we can validate that we're back to square one with permissions on that mailbox. So those are some simple tasks that you can do in Exchange online using PowerShell. So for the next segment, let's take a look at some simple tasks in Azure AD. For the final segment of this video, I wanted to run through a couple of additional simple tasks that we can do inside of Azure AD using PowerShell. So if you're not already connected from part one, here's the quick snippet to get connected again. Just there's a refresher, not going to run through it. Now the first task I want to go through is how to reset a user's password. So the first thing we need to do to set the password is to create a secure string out of the password that we want to use. So we need to use the convert to secure string commandlet. So I've got that listed here, and the password I'm using is what's inside of the quotes here. And since that password is being inputted as plain text, we need to use the as plain text flag. And then, of course, since password should never be in plain text and PowerShell knows that, we need to use the force flag to force it to convert it from plain text to the secure string. And then in this case, I'm also assigning it to the password variable. So then to set the password, we use the set Azure AD user password commandlet. And I've got the user account that we're setting the password on, and I've got the password set to that secure string that we just created. And I've also got a couple of additional parameters. So I'm setting the force change password next logon to true, and enforce change password policy to true. And of course, as the situation demands it, you can set those to false. So I'll go ahead and run that commandlet. And just another example of what that would look like without a splat, I've got this line 29, It's long, and we don't like scrolling left to right. So even though I just did, but this one's a little easier to read. The next task I want to look at is creating a group in Azure AD. So to create a group, we use the new Azure AD group commandlet. So I've got that here, and we need to give it a couple of parameters, including the display name, which I've got here. And since I'm creating a security group, I need to set security enabled to be true and mail enabled to be false. But mail nickname is a required parameter, so because this is not a mail enabled group, I'm just giving it a garbage value. If you were creating a mail enabled group, you'd want to set mail nickname to something more pertinent. So I'll go ahead and create this group. There we go, that's good output. And then here again, that same command without the splatting. And then to retrieve that group, we use the Get Azure AD Group commandlet. And in this case, I'm demonstrating how to use the filter parameter. So I'm saying for the filter, I'm telling it to return any groups where the display name is equal to underground layer admins. So the same display name we gave to that other group. And if you had multiple groups with that display name, this would return multiple groups. But as you're about to find out, I only have one group with that display name. And if you've used the Active Directory module for your on-prem Active Directory, you'll notice this filter is similar but slightly different. So for on-prem stuff, there's actually a dash in front of the EQ, and for all the comparison operators. But for the Azure AD module, it uses a format called OData version 3. And yes, I did have to look that up for the video. But yeah, that's the reason it's different. So the last thing I want to look at is managing the memberships for groups. So because the add and remove Azure AD group member commandlets, they require the object ID of the group as well as the object ID of the user. I mean, looking down below, this is the object ID for our underground layer admins group, and that's not something that I can easily remember. So this is how you would retrieve that value. So again, we're using the Get Azure AD group, using that same filter for retrieving this group. And I'm going to assign it to the ULA variable. And then I'm going to do the same thing for our user, but in this case, using the Get Azure AD user, I can actually specify the user's user principal name, since users are cool like that. So I'm going to assign it to the rec variable. And then to add that user to the group, we use the add Azure AD group member commandlet. And we specify the object ID of the group and the ref object ID of the user. So in this case, I'm looking at this ULA variable is the group, and the object ID property, so .object ID, that is the object ID property. So that's the object identifier for that group in Azure AD. Same thing for the user. And so if we run this commandlet, it doesn't give us any output, but we can validate that by using the Get Azure AD group member and specifying that group's object ID. So I can go ahead and run this, and we can see there's only one member of that group, and that's all. And so if we want to remove that user from that group, we use the Remove Azure AD group member commandlet. And again, the object ID is the group object ID, and this commandlet has a member ID parameter to where we can specify the user as the member ID. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that user, and then we can verify that that membership has all been cleared by using the Get Azure AD group member commandlet again. So there you go. That is some examples of what you can do in Office 365 using PowerShell.